author of one of the most popular Laurel and Hardy books ever. It's called Laurel and Hardy, The Magic Behind the Movies. Randy, who's on camera just now, is wearing an original Sons of the Desert fez. And you have other props as well, don't you, Randy?
Yes, I have a wooden soldier from Babes in Toyland. I'd gotten to know, it was very strange. You know, I was doing research for my book. This is back in 1980, and so 34 years ago. And somebody I didn't know who said, I used to live with Art and Venice Lloyd many years ago, and I don't know where Venice is now, but she had a sister named Florence who had a dress shop in Los Angeles, and here's the address of her dress shop. So I said, all right. So I wrote to the dress shop, and I said, hello, I'm doing research on Laurel and Hardy. Someone told me that you were connected somehow to Art Lloyd, and if you are, I'd be pleased to talk with you. And I got a letter back from this nice lady named Florence Jefferson. Not Jefferson, but Jefferson with P's. And she said, boy, are you lucky. She said, I was just closing up my dress shop after 40 years, but I got your letter. It came just in time. And she said, yes, my sister Venice lives in the little house next door to me, and she was married to Art Lloyd from 1927 until he died in 1954. And I'm sure she'd be happy to talk with you, and here's her phone number. So I called the phone number, and this very vivacious, bubbly lady was very happy to talk to me. And she'd never heard of Sons of the Desert or anything. So, you know, this was back in, when was this? This was in the spring of 1980. And this was just before we had Hollywood 80, which Bob Satterfield and the Way Out West tent were putting on. And so that was her first Sons of the Desert meeting. And so that was quite an event for her, because there were all these people there who were from the Hal Roach Studios. And all of a sudden, here she was meeting all these people that she'd known literally 50 years earlier, and some of them she hadn't seen for that time. So she was really, you know, bowled over by it. And so she was very grateful for that, because it was wonderful for her to suddenly get back in touch with all of these people whom she'd known decades before but hadn't seen for so long. And so a few months after that, one day I was visiting her at her house. We became very good friends, and I went to visit her many times. And she brought out this soldier, and she said, brought this home from the studio one day, and we've been using it as a Christmas decoration ever since. And I thought you should have it. Well, no, I was just floored by that. So I've honored her. If you want, if you can pause a second, I'll go get it if you want to see it. Want to see it?
We would love to. We would love to see it.
hang on, don't go anywhere.
Randy is going to show us the actual soldier that was used in the filming of March of the Wooden Soldiers. Wow.
You can see the actual color scheme. And it's made of metal. It's made of metal, and the legs move. This one just has a rifle. So I imagine this one is one of the ones that was standing on the sidelines. Maybe not one of the ones marching. Now, what's weird is it doesn't have its feet, or the shoes. If you remember in the movie, they have these sort of semi-circle shoes. There's a flat side inside, and then a rounded side here. And this has never had them. These were always sewn off on this, or sawed off. And I asked Roy Seawright about that. And he said, well, when I shot those animated sequences, he said, first of all, I had to shoot it on the Hal Roach Studios squash court. He said Hal Roach was an athletic guy, and he built a squash court at the studio, which is just basically a big cement pit. And he said I had to use that because they had combined both of our stages together to make the one huge Toyland set, so I had nowhere else to shoot it. And he said, so he said the soldiers were all on a metal grid. They were all connected together. Now I can't figure this out when I see the film. I don't know how this works, but that's what Roy said. He said that they did that in order so that they didn't have to move every individual soldier when they had them marching. When they animated the marching, they could do one row at a time, or they could do, you know, one set of figures at a time, because they would all be coordinated on this grid. So I don't quite know how that works, but that's what he told me, and that's why he said it didn't have any shoes, because it would have been connected to another soldier, to another soldier, to another soldier. But anyway, here it is. This is some sort of leather, and the rest of it is all metal, all hand painted. I don't know how many hundreds of these they made, but you can imagine what the labor cost was for a few brief seconds of film, really, because there isn't that much of that sequence. So it's just another example of how the Hal Roach Studios really took a lot of time and effort. For being such a small studio, they really spent a lot of money and a lot of time to make the films as good as they could. So this is the wooden soldier. I'll give you one last look at him here, if we can get up. There we are. So this is the last man standing of the platoon that saved Toyland from the bogeymen. Here's something else Venice gave me. Oh, Venice also gave me this, and I don't know, is this backwards to you or is it front? Well, it's frontwards. Okay. I don't know why she would have had this, but there was a man at the studio named L.A. French, Louis Alver, A-L-V-E-R French. It's often printed as Louis, L-E-W-I-S, Albert, but it's not Albert, because I've seen his draft registration card, I've seen census forms, and it's Alver, A-L-V-E-R. So he was known on the lot as L.A. French, and they always called him Los Angeles French as a gag. This man had been an accountant at the trucking firm when Hal Roach was a truck driver. And when Hal Roach started his studio, he thought that L.A. French would be a good guy to be an accountant for his studio. So that's how L.A. French became sort of a business manager for the Hal Roach studio. His son was Lloyd French, and Lloyd French became an assistant director on virtually all the Laurel and Hardy silent films without getting any credit. He does get a credit on That's My Wife, even though he only really shot about 1 day's worth of footage. And he finally becomes a credited director with Laurel and Hardy in 1933 with films like Me and My Pal and The Midnight Patrol. And unfortunately, he had health problems. He retired in 1943 when he was only 43 years old, and he died at 50 in 1950. So, but he was the assistant director, the uncredited assistant director on almost all the Laurel and Hardy silent films. Anyway, L.A. French, his dad, would every day mark what was going on at the studio. So, let me find a good entry here for you. Here. Oh, here. This is from when they were shooting You're Darn Tootin'. Now let me get it to the camera here. Okay, what it does is it indicates everything that was filming at the studio that day, and it's all handwritten by L.A. French. So we have here, what would this be? Oh, okay, C9 is Charlie Chase, G9 is the gang, our gang, S9 at that point is All Stars, which is what the Laurel and Hardy films were still designated as. And we have here S9 Kennedy, that's Edgar Kennedy directing. This is from You're Darn Tootin'. French, Lloyd French, is the assistant director. Driscoll and Hopkins are the art directors. And it's Ted Driscoll. I'm still not quite sure who Hopkins is, but we'll find that out. Then the camera crew is Floyd Jackman, E.V. White, we're still trying to find out his full name, and Stafford, whoever he is. He's an assistant cameraman. And it says Stars, New York Street. So this is Monday the 23rd, 1928, and this is one of the days when they were shooting the pants-ripping sequences for You're Darn Tootin'. So we have here C9, Charlie Chase, G9, the gang, S9, Laurel and Hardy, Stars, and D10 is Max Davidson. And we have here Hal Yates, Scott, I don't know who Scott is, Maury Lightfoot and Roy Seawright were the prop men. George Stevens, Jack Roach, and Collins were the cameramen. Davidson, it says, and CC, which means that they're shooting out somewhere on location in Culver City. So, anyway, once you learn how to read the hieroglyphics and you can crack the code, this is a very useful book. Unfortunately, I only have it for 1928, but that is a pivotal year for Laurel and Hardy. And They also have them, they have some of these, they're not as detailed, but they have these at USC, at least going up to 1932. I wish they had them for every year, but they do at least have them for 1932. So that's how we're able to figure out what the shooting days are.
That's incredible, Randy.
Answers to riddles. Well, I've been doing this research literally since I was a little kid. I mean, I have taped interviews with people that I did in 1972 when I was 13. And for example, I was going through some of my older stuff today. For example, here, remember these good old audio cassettes? Here we go. This is an interview I did with Lou Breslow, who wrote Great Guns and A Haunting We Will Go, and who, by the way, was married to Marion Byron of A Pair of Tights fame. This is from November 3rd, 1980. So I'm working with those, and here are my old file cards that I typed up. You can see I used to have an old manual typewriter, which I had to take to the Motion Picture Academy library. And I would go manually through old trade papers. They used to have bound volumes of trade papers. They don't let you access those anymore. Now you have to use microfilm. But in those days, you could actually look at the hard copy of old issues from the 30s or 20s of Daily Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Hollywood Filmograph, Film Daily, and Exhibitor's Herald World. And I went through every issue of those that pertained to the time of Laurel and Hardy, and there were no indexes, so I had to go page by page, just hoping to find Laurel and Hardy articles. And anytime I did, I would either type it up on a file card or I would dictate it into a tape recorder and then type it up when I got home. So it was the unnecessarily painstaking research that I did in those days. And of course, that was supplemented with interviews from everybody I could find who had worked at the Howard Studios. I found about 65 people, and then I lucked into 2 different collections of scripts, which between them had almost every Laurel and Hardy script. I still, for some reason, I still have never seen one for Big Business, nor for The Music Box, nor for Our Relations. But there aren't too many films where I haven't seen a script or several scripts. And that's how I was able to find all the scenes that were written for the films but not used in the films. I have a couple of other artifacts that pertain more directly to the second 100 years. You remember that, of course, in this film, Laurel and Hardy shaved their heads because they're supposed to be convicts. And it actually took about 3 months for their hair to grow back to the usual length. Fortunately, during a lot of that time, the Roach Studio had its annual vacation, and the whole studio would go on vacation for about a month, usually. And I think this was in July. In fact, I know it was July. They shot Second 100 Years and Call of the Cuckoo right after it. And those were done by about June 20th or thereabouts. And after that, the studio went on vacation for July. Well, during that time, Stan went back to England for the first time, I think, since 1912. It had been many years. Oops, did we lose you? Hello? Anyway, I'll keep talking in case we're still on. Anyway, Stan went back to visit his dad and didn't come back until the studio had already gone back into business. And that's why there is a film with Hardy and Max Davidson called Love 'Em and Feed 'Em. And it was clearly meant to be a Laurel and Hardy film, but because Stan was still on vacation in England and had an extra couple of weeks there, it wasn't Laurel and Hardy, it's Davidson and Hardy. This is Oliver Hardy's passport picture. During their vacation, Babe and Myrtle, his second wife, they went to Cuba because Havana was sort of the playground in those days, and it was like Las Vegas is today. And you have to remember that in America we had prohibition, which meant that alcohol was outlawed. So people would have to go to Mexico or Canada or Cuba in order to get their hooch. And so Babe and Myrtle went to Havana, Cuba, where Babe could throw away a lot of his money on the casinos and horse races, and Myrtle could get some alcohol. But in any event, here is their 1927 passport picture, and you can see Babe still has his head shaved. And this is and I also have a note from someone who was aboard ship with them, and just saying, congratulations, I hope you have a great time. That's from July 4th of 1927. So there's a little artifact from right after the shooting of the second 100 years. The script was finished on June 10th of 1927. This was filmed between Saturday, June 11th and Saturday, June 18th of 1927. So they shot this in a very quick week, and obviously they were under the gun to get this finished before the studio went on vacation, because they actually filmed on Sunday, June 12th. Normally, they never filmed anything on a Sunday unless they were really under the gun to get a film finished. And this was released on October 8th. Originally, I don't know if your copy will have it, but originally this had tinted sequences. You'll notice there are some scenes where Laurel and Hardy are tunneling under their cell. Those originally had blue tints because film stock was not terribly light sensitive in those days, and it was hard for them to do night sequences. So what they would do would be they'd basically shoot during the daytime and then wash the film, the prints, in a dark blue, darker, made it look like nighttime. So that was the best they could do in those days before the panchromatic film came in. This is directed by a man named Fred Gill, who directed most of the early Laurel and Hardy films. Everybody on the lot called him Chili Gill, because there was some sort of Mexican connection with that family. Fred Gill had a sister named Clara Gill, and she plays the cigarette girl in Their Purple Moment. She has sort of a Louise Brooks hairdo, black hair. That's Clara Gill. You also see her in an Our Gang film called Shivering Shakespeare. That's the one where the kids put on the Roman play, Quo Vadis or whatever it is, and she's the girl selling the pies. Anyway, that's Clara Gill, Fred's sister. Fred Gill became a long-time associate of the man who photographed this film, who is George Stevens. Titles are by Beanie Walker. Harley Marquis Walker, by the way, is what the HM stands for. Harley Marquis Walker. And the rest of it we'll talk about after we see the movie. This is another item from the second 100 years. This is the original press sheet. Now, every time that the Roach Studios released a film, if it was a short, it would be a press sheet, which is only one big piece of paper. But what it has is prepared news articles so that newspapers could just take these verbatim and reprint them, and also prepared reviews, which of course were always raves. And then inside, this is very fragile, we have original artwork. You can see that. There's the posters. There were two different posters expressly for this film. There's a 1 sheet and a 3 sheet, and then there was a stock all-star poster. And then there's also other newspaper ads you can see here. I'm trying to get them maneuvered to the camera as best I can. Let's see here. There we go. So there you see some of the line art that would have been used for newspapers. And then on the back, they show you all the different lobby cards. They actually made 8 lobby cards. In the midst of the Depression, a couple of them got cut down to 6. But most of the time they did 8 lobby cards, including a title card, for every one of the shorts. And in the talkie era anyway, they did a trailer for the shorts. I've never known of any other short subjects that got trailers, coming attraction trailers. But the Laurel and Hardys did. And none of them survives except for about three frames from the one for Our Wife, which Paul Gierke has. But what's interesting about this is the first time that Laurel and Hardy were publicized as a team. And you'll see here it says, new starring team uncorks riotous performance in first picture as comedy duo. And then down here, there's that famous still we see of Laurel and Hardy with Dorothy Coburn. It says, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, the new Hal Roach comedy team. So I saw this peeking out at me from the shop window of a Hollywood memorabilia store back about 1975 or 76. I guess I was about 16 or something. And I saw that, and I said, I have to have that. That is a key piece of information. And I think it cost $35 back then, which was probably all the money I had in the world. But thank God I was able to get it. So we have that wonderful piece of documentation. That may be the only copy of that that survives. So it's nice to have that, because it shows that this film that we just saw was really the first one where the studio thought of them as a team. This is probably the first film after Leo McCarey came into Roach's office, and McCarey was the guy who said, why don't we build a series around Stan and Babe, because they've been doing parts together in these other pictures, and they really seem to have something working between the two of them. So I'm pretty sure that this is the film where the studio really began grooming them and promoting them as a team. So historically valuable.
I have some questions for you that have been submitted on the forum. We have one from Tony, who's in the room right now, who asked, this is related to the location of the movie. Tony says, according to information I found on this silent comedy's IMDb page, shooting locations for the second 100 years included the Goodyear tire and rubber plant in Los Angeles and the Los Angeles County Jail in Culver City. Do you know whether or not this information is in fact correct?
I think, in fact, our friend Brad Farrell will tell you that the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company has been discounted and is not true. And what they meant by the LA County Jail is really the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. That's where the gate was, and they used that again in the Huskow. And that, if you come to Los Angeles, you will still find that building. It's on the southeast corner of Marengo Street and Mission Road. So a lot of the buildings that you see are still there. Obviously, it's changed a lot in the ensuing almost 90 years, but you can still see enough to know that that's where it was.
We have another question regarding Bob O'Connor. Now, let me just read this. He is an actor of whom not much seems to be known. When I first saw Bob in the Spanish language versions of Night Owls and Below Zero, his accent and Latin appearance caused me to assume he was Latin, which his Irish surname would seem to refute. Suffice to say, Bob O'Connor is one Hal Roach player whom I would like to know a little bit more about.
Well, it's interesting. Bob O'Connor sometimes spells his name with one N, C-O-N-O-R, and sometimes with two. And there is an actor named Bob Mazuka O'Connor, and I'm not sure if he's the same one as our Bob O'Connor here. But I can tell you that this one was at the Roach Studios for a good 10 years. I just saw him the other day in The Bohemian Girl. If you remember the shot where little Bobby Dunn, cross-eyed Bobby Dunn, is getting the tankards of wine for Laurel and Hardy, Bob O'Connor is the waiter, sort of waiting impatiently at the bar saying, hurry up, hurry up. So he did little bits like this at the studio all the time, and I need to go back and look at the payrolls, which are at USC, but a lot of people like Bob O'Connor had other jobs at the Hal Roach Studios and would just do little bits like this as needed, and that was not their main job. For example, Charlie Hall on the payrolls is paid probably more frequently for being a carpenter than he is for being an actor, oddly enough. And you know, there are other people like a Tiny Sanford, for example, built cabinets. You know, that was his day job. And when he got out of the movie business, which he did pretty much after the late 30s, he became a contractor and built houses. If you go to the 1940 United States Census and you look for Stanley J. Sanford, he's still living in Hollywood, but he doesn't list his occupation as actor anymore. Now he's contractor, and he owns a company that builds houses. So, you know, these people that we know only as actors, they had other lives and other careers sometimes. But Bob O'Connor was very busy during the time when they made the Spanish language pictures, and yes, probably his most prominent role with Laurel and Hardy is in the Spanish version of Below Zero, where he takes the place of Frank Holiday.
We have another question here. Is there any inside story as to why they shaved their heads for this film? Because none of the other prisoners appear to have their heads shaved.
Well, Usually, evidently, convicts had their hair shaved. There may have been some security reason for that. They may have been hiding a razor blade or something else in their hair. Who knows? But that was usual prison garb, and that's why, or prison attire. So that's why they did that. Obviously, that was not a stylish haircut in the 1920s. It may have been in the early 1960s. Everybody wore their hair like that. That was the craze back then, but not in the late 1920s. And so it was, Laurel and Hardy were actually being very obliging in shaving off their hair for this film. They probably did it knowing that they would have a month's vacation for at least some of their hair to grow back. But as you'll notice in Call of the Cuckoo, which they made literally the week after they finished making this picture, they still have the shaved heads. And I guess because they were supposed to be inmates of an insane asylum, they figured it wouldn't matter. But yeah, they did that expressly because that was supposed to be the prison look. And you'll notice also whenever they have Walter Long as an escaped convict, or in Pardon Us, he has very close cropped, very tightly shaved hair. In fact, he's clearly emulating Wallace Beery in the movie The Big House. If you ever have a chance to see The Big House, a lot of things that are in Pardon Us will suddenly become clearer to you, and you'll see that they are directly referring to things in The Big House. And when you see Wallace Beery in that movie, you go, ah, that's why they got Walter Long, because he looks just like Wallace Beery in The Big House. So, it's important to think about Laurel and Hardy in the context of other movies of that time, because a lot of times they do refer to specific events in other films. Now, I haven't yet seen The Lives of a Bengal Lancer. Hal Roach saw that film, and he was absolutely bowled over by it, and he immediately put Bonnie Scotland into production as far as getting a story going, because he thought that setting was perfect for Laurel and Hardy. They had been planning to make The Bohemian Girl. This is in January of 1935. They were going to make The Bohemian Girl at that point, and Roach put that on hold because he'd seen The Lives of a Bengal Lancer and immediately said, no, this is a great setting for Laurel and Hardy, and let's do it right now, right after this picture has been released. And evidently, if you see Lives of a Bengal Lancer, there are scenes in it that pertain directly to Bonnie Scotland. So I need to see that. But anyway, that is the case in some instances, that Laurel and Hardy films are directly inspired by films which were released not too long before they were made. This is
Wow.
This is the manuscript as it stands. I finished Our Relations this morning. Now it'll be half this thickness because these are printed only on one side. but this is the Holy Writ. So we start with the lucky dog. I still have to do the first few chapters again. But anyway, this is all through Our Relations, and like I say, it's going to be a big book, but it will have an awful lot of new information. I'm sorry to say that there are many things I had to correct, but better late than never. And we have much more access to information now than I had back in 1980 when I was writing a lot of the original book.
So when do you hope to bring the book out? Do you have a time scale on it, or is it just pretty much ongoing at the moment?
I'm crossing my fingers to have it ready for the Laurel and Hardywood convention the first week of July.
Nice.
So I have to really hurry and get this done, but I'm hoping to have finished copies at that point. See, the nice thing about technology now is you can do books as a print on demand, and it takes a lot less time to do them than it used to, and you don't. In the old days, I had to print 5,000 copies at a time and pray that somebody would buy them. Well, now I don't have to do that. Now I can just print them up as they're already sold. So that's a big relief.
Have you gone back to listen to your taped interviews with Laurel and Hardy's colleagues in order to see if there was anything else which would be good for writing about in the new edition of the book?
I've gone back to my written transcriptions because it's much easier and quicker to read those than it would be to actually listen to the tapes. And in doing that, I can just skim through them and see if there's anything uh, additional that I should add into it. Mostly what I'm adding in are occasional new things from the scripts, um, and a lot of things from print documents, because there's so much more access to those things now on the internet than I had back then. For example, through the Los Angeles Public Library, I can go and search through Los Angeles Times articles going back to the 1880s, and I can do that right here. Well, back 34 years ago, I had to go literally to the Los Angeles Times building in downtown Los Angeles and ask somebody beforehand to pull the file from the morgue on Stan Laurel or Oliver Hardy. And of course, it would just be whatever happened to be in that file. It wouldn't necessarily be everything that got printed in the Los Angeles Times. Well, now it's much easier and more effective, and I can find much more material in one day now than I would be able to find in 2 weeks back then.
Do you know why Laurel and Hardy never returned to the theme of golf after Should Married Men Go Home?
Well, I know Stan was not quite as enthusiastic about golf as Babe was, although he did own some clubs which were recently auctioned, I believe. Lois Laurel, Stan's daughter, said that the clubs that Stan used in Should Married Men Go Home were his actual clubs, and she remembered those being at their home at 718 North Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills. As to why they didn't make any more golf movies, well, I don't know. I don't know what story would lend itself to a golf setting outside of Should Married Men Go Home. I mean, after they'd done that one with the mud throwing and all of that, that had been pretty much reprised in the talkie era by the Three Stooges in Three Little Beers. And another thing, too, is remember that it was always more difficult and more expensive to shoot outdoors on location. And even though Roach did All Teed Up with Charlie Chase, so there's an example of a Hal Roach golf-themed movie. And maybe because Charlie Chase had done that, maybe that's a reason why Laurel and Hardy didn't do one. Maybe golf was too maybe golf was too sacrosanct to Babe Hardy to want to make fun of it.
Yes. You know, we've just about exhausted our hour with Randy, and I would just like to, first of all, say a massive thank you to Randy for doing this today, because this is incredible. I mean, it really is. The technology these days allows us to do this and chat with Randy live. We must do this again.
Sure. Just let me know in advance, and I'll be here for you.
Isn't that lovely, guys? Randy, I could sit here for another hour, or another 2 hours, or another 3 hours, and I'm sure most of the guys could. Somebody compared you to the modern day John McCabe. So that's a nice one.
Well, I never had the privilege of meeting either Stan Laurel or Oliver Hardy. I'll tell you my story about that. I was already a big Laurel and Hardy fan late in 1964. That's when I first saw them. I was 5 years old, and I saw them on television. In Los Angeles, on one of our local television stations, they had a show called The $1 Million Movie, and it was on Channel 9 in Los Angeles. And they must have had a very small film library, because they would run the same film at 7:30 in the evening for an entire week. So, not different films, the same film. You better like that film, because they're going to run it every night for this week at 7:30. Well, one week it was The Golden Age of Comedy, the Robert Youngson compilation. And I must have caught it early in the week, because I remember watching it over and over and over again for the rest of that week. And by the end of that week, I was just sworn to the faith of Laurel and Hardy. I loved that movie so much. And so I instantly wanted to know more about these guys. Who were they? And I did find some information about them. I remember I found a Larry Harmon Stan Laurel bank. That was the one toy, the one bit of Laurel and Hardy memorabilia that I had at that point. And it was one day, I just turned 6 recently, and I was prattling on about Laurel and Hardy while I was getting ready for school. And in our kitchen, I remember saying, gee, I wonder if either Laurel or Hardy are still alive. And at that precise moment, my dad brought in the Los Angeles Times, and on the front page it said, Stan Laurel, 74, film comedian, dies at home. And it was so spooky because I had just said, I wonder if Laurel or Hardy is still alive, and boom, there came my answer, that Stan had just died. And when I read that, I also learned that Oliver Hardy had died 8 years before. And so maybe that's why I was so, I kind of felt cheated, because had I known a year earlier, I probably would have been able to go visit him in Santa Monica. That's probably why I wanted to find everybody I could who was still around and talk to them. Fortunately, when I was 12 years old, they let me into the Way Out West tent. God bless Lori Jones of the Way Out West tent, because she bent the rules. I was supposed to be 16, and she let me in at 12. So my first meeting was August of 1971. I just missed meeting Billy Gilbert, because he had been at their banquet in June of 71, their previous meeting, and he died in September. So I just missed him. But they, at that point, they had all sorts of people just coming as members to their meetings. And it was kind of frustrating, because you'd go to a Way Out West meeting and they'd say, well, tonight we have with us Joe Rock, who produced Stan Laurel's solo comedies. Take a bow, Joe. And there's Ruth Laurel, Stan's second wife. Take a bow, Ruth. And there's Lucille Hardy, Babe's widow. Take a bow, Lucille. And, and that would be it. And then they'd watch Hog Wild again. And I thought, why are we not doing interviews with these people that are just sitting here? This is their history. So I began taking a tape recorder when I was 12 and making a nuisance of myself and doing these little impromptu interviews as I could at Sons meetings. And then when I was older and able to drive, then I started tearing all around the San Fernando Valley, going to Encino and Studio City and Tarzana and these little outlying areas where everybody lived, and going through phone books and trying to find everybody I could find. So, that's probably the impetus for it, was the fact that I just missed meeting Stan Laurel. But so I wouldn't call myself the modern day John McCabe, because John McCabe had the primary source of Stan and Babe. But I did get to talk to Hal Roach on several occasions, not as many as Dick Ban, who was a close friend of his for 25 years. And I still think of Dick as being the ultimate source on anything pertaining to the studio. But, I've done what I could do. Living here in Orange County, I'm 30 miles away from Los Angeles, so it was always quite a drive. So I wasn't right in the heart of everything. But, being a high school kid and a college kid, I did what I could do.
Randy Skretvedt, everybody.
So long. Cheers. So long.